The anime begins by showing a young man named Yuji who is dealing with a monster in the wilderness. With the help of Sura the Slime and Proudwolf, his subordinates, Yuji managed to defeat the monster without any effort. Meanwhile, in a village called Pashton, there is an adventurers guild, where adventurers usually gather to get a quest. At that place, a male adventurer named Gale is seen hanging out with other adventurers, and he tells them that he has seen a slime capable of spitting fire. However, he is laughed at by the other adventurers because a slime can't do such a powerful thing. At the same time, Yuji arrived at the Adventurers Guild earlier than usual. The Adventurers Guild staff, a girl named Lily, thought he had failed in his mission because he returned so soon. But surprisingly, he tells Lily that he has completed his mission of collecting as many Dryya flowers as possible. Unfortunately, because the Dryya flowers Yuji collected had exceeded expectations, even meeting 2 years' supply, Lily immediately reported this to her manager, Aegis. Not long after, an adventurer suddenly appeared and frantically reported about the smoke signals coming from the forest, as well as the appearance of a large number of monsters. Upon hearing that, Yuji communicated with the slimes in the forest and asked what was happening. The slimes tell him that the herd of monsters suddenly appeared out of nowhere and is now heading to Pashton. On the other hand, Aegis ordered the adventurers to evacuate to a safe place because it was estimated that more than 10,000 monsters would attack the village. However, Gale and the other adventurers are determined to stay there to protect the residents. Yuji then offers to defeat the swarm of monsters by using a dragon bone that can create a burst of fire, which is said to be able to annihilate the swarm of monsters at once. At first, Aegis and the other adventurers seem to doubt Yuji, but Gale thinks they can count on him and then asks him about his plan. While Gale and the other adventurers prepare with their weapons to take on the swarms of monsters on the front line, Lily and Aegis distribute medicinal herbs made from Dryya flowers to the adventurers and the Pashton villagers. On the other hand, Yuji ordered Proudwolf to evacuate the slimes still in the forest so they wouldn't be trapped among the swarms of monsters about to be exterminated. As the swarms of monsters approach the front line, Gale and the adventurers immediately launch an attack on the monsters and fight against them. Monitoring the situation from the top of the tower, Yuji issued his spell creation to determine the right attack, which could defeat the monsters but not cause much damage. At the same time, he gets a message from Dryad, his subordinate's forest spirit, informing him of the appearance of a mysterious man in the forest. From his suspicious behavior, Dryad assumed that the man was the mastermind behind the monsters' attacks because he carried a magic stone that could control the monsters. With his multiple tamed slimes, Yuji used his magic power to overthrow the mysterious man and deactivate the power of the magic stone. However, when he is about to interrogate the man for information, the man ends his own life instead. Afterward, Yuji ordered Proudwolf to return to the village with some of the slimes, while Dryad and the other slimes were ordered to hide because Yuji intended to launch his attack. Yuji, who had noticed Lily's presence behind him and had been watching him secretly for a while, asked her to withdraw the adventurers fighting on the front line. Gale and his comrades, pressed by the attacks of the monster swarms that came repeatedly, finally got help from the slimes who could spit fire. After everyone returned to the village, Yuji placed the slimes around the village and created a magical barrier to protect everyone while he annihilated the swarms of monsters with a fierce burst of fire. The attack managed to annihilate the swarm of monsters instantly, but in the process, Yuji lost a lot of strength and collapsed unconscious. Not long after, Yuji finally woke up, just as the adventurers and all the villagers were about to celebrate their victory by feasting. At the same time, Aegis and his men found the body of a man in the forest and took him to the village for further examination. Meanwhile, Yuji, who has recovered, decides to leave the Pashton village with his subordinates. Aegis then searched the man's belongings and found a lantern with the symbol of an organization that seemed quite dangerous, as Aegis planned to report it to the Central. Yuji, who was on his way somewhere, could find out information about the man because he had placed a slime in Aegis' office. The next day, Aegis and his companions finally arrived at a town called Kilya. Before heading to the Adventurers Guild in the city, Yuji took the time to rest and eat with the slimes and Proudwolf. Not long after, Yuji heard the sound of church bells, and a resident told him that an amazing priest had come from the Central. Afterward, Yuji signed up for the Adventurers Guild to get a mission. At first, he had difficulty registering because of his low rank. However, after knowing he has fairly reliable tracking ability, he is finally allowed to choose whatever mission he wants. Yuji intends to take on a fairly difficult mission and forms a guild party consisting of the male knife wielder Rhodys, the archer Tina, and the spear wielder Lisa. They started a mission to track down the location of the Earth Dragon, known as a powerful monster that is quite dangerous. Yuji and his group rushed to start their journey to carry out their mission. On the way, he received a little appreciation from his group members because he managed to track the whereabouts of a herd of monsters within 2 kilometers. In fact, Yuji had ordered Proudwolf and the slimes to leave first so that they could monitor the situation ahead and report it to him. After finally confronting the monsters, Rhodys managed to defeat them alone. In the evening, Yuji and his group decide to camp somewhere. Rhodys said they would take turns guarding and then determine the order. In his sleep, Yuji dreamed about when he first arrived in that world. He used to be a salaryman who often worked overtime. One day, Yuji, who had fallen asleep from overwork, suddenly woke up in a completely different world. In the other world, he is a monster tamer. The creature he first tamed was a slime. The slime took him to a place where he found magical books. With just one look, Yuji can master the magic abilities of the books he reads. In that place, he found a lot of slimes, which he then tamed. After that, the slimes studied the magical books in that place, which automatically, he got the knowledge and power from the magic books read by the slimes. Not long after, Yuji wakes up and gets news that Rhodys has disappeared somewhere, as well as Tina and Lisa. Proudwolf and the slimes watched the situation, then told Yuji that they found Rhodys walking through the forest in the middle of the night while secretly following him. Tina and Lisa turned out to have suspected Rhodys from the start and intended to reveal what he was actually planning. Rhodys then headed to a hut in the middle of the forest and met several men in the hut. A slime managed to infiltrate the hut and listen to him and a man talking, where he intends to sell Tina and Lisa to them before the blue moon appears. Tina and Lisa turned out to have been secretly investigating Rhodys because adventurers who had been his party members were always rumored to just disappear. Waiting outside the hut, they accidentally stepped on a trap he had set earlier. When they almost got caught, Rhodys and his gang decided to retreat after seeing a monster in the dark. The monster turned out to be Proudwolf and the slimes, who were ordered by Yuji to distract them from Tina and Lisa hiding not far away. Yuji then uses his magical power to freeze everyone in the hut. After the slimes brought Rhodys and his gang in front of Yuji, Tina and Lisa recognized one of them as Galios, the leader of a gang of bandits on the run. Because Rhodys has been caught trying to harm them, Tina and Lisa intend to abort the mission and return to the city. However, Yuji tries to convince them to continue the mission. After learning that he mastered